response at all from the Prime Minister, and it's not good enough.
Speaker.
I call the Honourable Minister, Jerry Brown.
Mr. Speaker, I can't work out exactly what it is that the Labor Party finds so troublesome in this bill from the speech given by their lead speaker this afternoon. Hard to work out why it is that they would deny that there is a significant resource lying on the ground, likely to rot, with no value to anyone, and they're saying just leave it there, don't touch it. Then they're dressing it up by saying, well, we don't want to touch it, we don't want it used because the local people on the West Coast haven't had a chance to have their say about whether we should or not. Well, I would say to members of the Labor Party, go back to Blackball where you did your grandstanding efforts just a few months ago, go to other small communities on the West Coast and ask them what do they think. And if the answer isn't 90% in favour of recovering this timber, then I'll eat my hat. Mr. Speaker, if I was Damien O'Connor, relying on the defence of the Labor Party position from the speech of Ruth Dyson, I would say, now you all know why I look even more grey than usual. Mr. Speaker, what an appalling argument to run. Firstly, there is this suggestion that there is going to be a destruction of an industry on the West Coast that exists now. Well, sir, the destruction of that industry occurred in the early 2000s when the native logging was cut dead, and there were all sorts of extravagant promises made to millers at the time about the quantity, the stumpage as it's known, inside the exotic forests. And what was found in a very short time? It didn't exist. So there were people on the West Coast who made millions of dollars worth of investment in what they thought would be an exotic logging opportunity for them that was lost because of the misinformation peddled by the then Labor government about the state of those timber stocks. And here we have, sir, the party out there that did all that coming into this House today to say that if we were to recover some of these 2,000 hectares of wind-blown timber, a small fraction that will be recovered, mind you, sir, that's all. If we were to recover that, it would destroy some local industries. Well, sir, I need to tell the House that this will not make one jot of price difference to any of those superb timbers. It will be, sir, an adjunct to the market, no doubt about that. But it will let other New Zealanders share the sort of ambience that members of Parliament sit in every day that the House sits. Mr. Speaker, the other thing that I found fascinating about that speech was the concern for the local member. Actually, I should say the lack of concern for the local member. And, sir, I suppose it's the problem, because that issue I spoke of before, where the local millers on the West Coast who made those big investments thinking there would be exotic logs for them to cut, found that they weren't and found their businesses in trouble, went to the local member and said, can we have some help? The government is not able to honour its promises to us, the Labor government, so can you help us out? We've made these big investments. He did nothing, not a thing, didn't lift a finger. He was sitting in the cabinet, never even brought the issue up. It took, sir, the advocacy of the national member, Chris Ockenvall, to put it before the cabinet and to get a resolution. In 2010, it was a national government that came to the aid of that distressed industry on the West Coast, not a Labor government. And they sit over there laughing. Well, Mr. O'Connor, don't laugh at your own constituents would be a good piece of advice that I'm sure the Speaker would want to give you. Mr. Speaker, the other question that's really, or point that staggered me, was Ruth Dyson sort of labouring over this idea that the Department of Conservation, who will be the beneficiary of funds that are accumulated from this particular exercise, was spending about $6,500 on a photo opportunity. Well, let me tell the House this. 1 cubic metre of Matai timber will sell for that price. 1 cubic metre. We've got at least 200 hectares of native timbers that will be recovered, and probably up to 10 metres in each single stump. So that, sir, is tens of thousands of metres. So taking one to tell the West Coast very publicly, in a very demonstrable way, that the United Party, the Maori Party and the National Party are very keen on giving them an opportunity in their area seems to me pretty good value. Certainly, sir, cheaper than the cost of having to bail out West Coasters who were lied to by the previous Labor government over the extent of the exotic stumpage available to them. Mr Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable Ruth Dyson.
I take offence at the comment the Minister just made, and I ask you to require him to withdraw and apologise.
No, this is a very robust debate. We live in a healthy democracy. The member is not making any dispersions against members individually. He has addressed the House. This is a robust debate. I call the Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
Well, Mr Speaker, let's look at it this way then. The Labor government went out and ended the Indigenous timber industry on the West Coast, shut it down, and said to all the millers over there, here is, firstly they gave some money to a trust to see what they could do, and said, here is a block or multiple blocks of Indigenous timber so the industry can carry on. In a very short time, it was proven that the figures that they gave to those millers were wrong. And people lost tens of thousands of dollars in individual businesses. Those businesses, in many cases, closed down. And, Mr Speaker, it took nearly 10 years and the advocacy of Chris Ockenwald to point out the terrible situation that the Labor Party had dumped the West Coast in for that matter to be sorted out. And I was very pleased to be a party with them in 2010 when we sorted that out. So coming back to the issue here, simply this. If the Conservation Act had anticipated back in 1987 that there could be these tens of thousands of hectares damaged by windfall, would it perhaps then have made some provision for it? Mr Speaker, the fact is that it's been almost 30 years since that Act was passed, and this is the first and only time that we've seen this type of destruction. And so it's appropriate that the person who brings this bill to the House, the Minister of Conservation, is able to recognise that this is an extraordinary opportunity and for the House to consider a one-off exception to that bill. It would be utterly appalling if all of that windblown timber were just left there to rot, just left there to waste. And the other point I'll make, and there'll be people out there who want to argue with me on this because they, of course, will be learned people who know a lot about this from their textbooks. If timber is left to lie on the ground like that, it will delay the regeneration. It will delay the regeneration. I well remember my uncle, who was involved in West Coast timber milling, telling the story of a group of conservationists with a very well-known conservationist leading them, a person well known to us, in fact, came up the road in a bit of a bus, the Bush Road, came across him coming out of the bush in his Land Rover with the crew, and when they met on the one-way road, had a bit of a talk, these guys said, we're coming to have a look at the native logging operation here on the coast. And he said to them, well, look around, because this is where it is, and this is where it's happened. That was selective logging in new, clean native forests, Mr Speaker. It had regenerated to a level very, very quickly. And I'll make the point too, and argue if you like, but a beech forest can return in 80 years. Right. So why would we leave it rotting for 30 years to prolong that regrowth to 110 when you can have it sooner? There are small little points the Green Party will overcome, because all of a sudden there's got to be an explosion of bugs and all sorts of other grubs that eat timber. And Mr Speaker, when that happens, we'll probably be cutting down the trees so that we can feed those bugs and grubs in the long term. I think this is a good bill. I think it does reach a pragmatic solution, and it creates an opportunity for the West Coast. And I've got to say, even if he crosses the floor on this bill, everyone on the West Coast will know that voting for Mr O'Connor, voting for a Labor-led government with the Greens driving the bus, is never going to see progress for them.
I call the Honourable Damien O'Connor.